As Karen comes forward to read scripture, I invite you to rise and body your spirit.
Thank you. Today's scripture is from Psalm 1. Happiness comes to those who reject the path of violence, who refuse to associate with criminals or even sit with people who belittle others. Happiness comes to those who delight in the law of God and meditate on it day and night. They're like the trees planted by the flowing water. They bear fruit in every season, and their leaves never wither. Everything they do will prosper. But not wrongdoers. They're like the chaff that the wind blows away. They won't have a taproot to anchor them when judgment comes, nor will corrupt individuals be given a place at the gather of the just. God watches over the steps of those who do justice, but those on a path of violence and injustice will find themselves irretrievably lost. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church.
You good with introduction?
Yeah.
Yes.
Let's see. I want to thank Malik Yakini for being our speaker today. Malik Yakini is co-founder and former executive director of the Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network. In that capacity, he co-led the development of the Detroit Food Policy Council and D-Town Farm, which is over in Rouge Park, if any of you folks know where that is. He provided leadership in the organizing and development phases of the Detroit Food Commons, a new 31,000 square foot building in Detroit's North End that houses the Kuchigagulia Kitchens, Mama and Monty Humphrey Banquet Hall, and the Detroit People's Food Co-op. It's right there on Euclid and Woodward, and I just know everybody in here is a member, right? He serves on the co-op board. Yakini is a co-founder of the National Black Food and Justice Alliance. He is adamantly opposed to the systems of white supremacy, capitalism, and patriarchy, and has an intense interest in contributing to the development of an international black food sovereignty movement. I'm just gonna add that we all see the Detroit People's Food Co-op, which is a wonderful outgrowth of a long organizing movement that Malik was very essential to making happen. A lot of times we see the end result, and we don't see all of the work that came before, lots and lots of years of organizing. So I just want to lift that up. He may not realize this, but I've been watching him for a long time, and he has been very inspirational to all the things that I do. And I want to thank you, and I'm going to let him take it from here. Thank you, Malik.
Good morning. How's everyone? It's such a pleasure to be here in this bastion of freedom, equity, resistance. We need more churches that live out their spirituality in a way that really makes a difference in people's lives. So I always start when I have the chance to speak to people by giving praise to the Creator, and I'm not trying to impose my spiritual view on anybody. It's just that's what I got to do, because that's what I put in front of me, and that's my protection. So I'll start with that. And then I also have to honor my ancestors, those whose labor built the wealth of the entire Western world. I would be negligent if I didn't express my love and appreciation for Sister Maureen Taylor. I want to be like her when I grow up. I mean, that spirit of standing up for people and with no fear, you know, is really what we need. In fact, I would say that once we embrace our faith in God more than we embrace the fear of oppression, we'll be free. Okay? And so I see that in Sister Maureen, and I want to honor and respect that. You know, I did a radio interview with her a long time ago, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago, and she was dealing with some of the water shutoffs at the time, and she said on the radio, if they shut your water off, cut it back on. I was like, yes, that's my kind of leader right there. So I'm not going to say on the mic whether or not I've actually cut people's water back on with the water keys they sell at Home Depot. I'm not going to say that, but thank you, Sister Maureen, for standing up, and we should all be following in your footsteps. So I'll say just a brief bit about myself, and then I'll talk about what I was invited here to talk about today. So I was born in Detroit in 1956. And I was impacted by the radical politics of the 60s and 70s. In fact, I'm so thankful to have been born in Detroit at the time I was born here. So I've been an activist for more than 50 years. Most recently, I served as executive director of the Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network, a position from which I retired in June of this year. So technically, I'm unemployed. I do serve as a board member of the Detroit People's Food Co-op. I learned how to live on Social Security, too. That's a challenge. So thank you, Sister Karen, Reverend Paul, for inviting me. I always am thankful when people have the nerve to invite me because I don't operate by anybody's script, and nobody, including myself, knows what I'm going to say, and I get invited a lot of places once. So thank you. So thank you very much. So I'm here to talk about Black food sovereignty as we start the celebration of the 100th anniversary of Black History Month, which was started by Carter G. Woodson as Negro History Week in 1926. But before I get into the main subject matter, which is food, we have to kind of situate our struggle for justice within the food system within the larger situation we're dealing with. So I don't have to go into a lot of detail about that because of what I've heard from this congregation already. Thank you, Reverend Paul. But I will evoke the words of Sister Grace Lee Boggs, who asked the question often, what time is it on the clock of the world? And so we have several indications around us of what time it is, and the good Reverend has listed several things that we need to be aware of that are going on contemporarily. What we've seen in the last couple of weeks is the outright murder of U.S. citizens, and yes, Sister Maureen, even on cowboy movies, they told people you don't shoot people in the back. But that's for people who have a moral compass. We have seen the lying to and about American citizens, so not only murdering people in the street, but then characterizing peace-loving people as terrorists. We've seen the erasure, the attempted erasure of Black history in federal buildings and federal parks. We've seen the demeaning and the calling for the wholesale deportation of Somalis and other immigrants, and internationally, of course, we've seen the tremendous destruction in Palestine and the recent invasion of Venezuela and the kidnapping of the president of a sovereign nation. So I'll end by saying, in answer to the question, what time is it on the clock of the world, that this is what fascism looks like. Have no doubt what we're dealing with, okay? This is authoritarianism. This is fascism, full-blown. We need to be in high resistance mode. So there's so many areas that we need to fight on, and the thing, you know, in the last maybe 20 years ago, activists have started using this word intersectionality, because no matter what issue you're working on, it's tied to other issues, right? Because there's one system that kind of directs the oppression of the world in order to put tremendous profits in the hands of these filthy capitalists. So the food system is part of that larger problem, and I do want to talk about that and some of the work that we've been doing in Detroit to try to mitigate some of those problems. So when we talk about the food system, first of all, most people don't think about a system when they go to eat dinner, right? They think about I go to the grocery store, I buy what I want, I come home, I cook it, I eat it, and that's kind of it. They don't think that there's this whole process that occurs before you go to the grocery store that involves planting the seed, involves cultivating the soil, involves harvesting, involves distribution, involves packaging, it involves the retail level, it involves the post-consumer, what happens to the waste. All those things we call the food system. And we know, like almost every other system in American society, that corporations are controlling it. And whenever we have corporations in control of our health and our life, we're in trouble. Because they certainly are not concerned about our well-being. They're concerned about one thing, which is profit. So the inequities in the food system are rampant. They're based in part on so-called race, this unscientific concept that we've been taught. They're based in part on your zip code, where you live, and they're based in part on class. And so we find that in cities where we have large black and brown populations, we have problems with food access. But we also find in rural areas where we have poor whites who are growing the food that we have problems with food access as well. There are tremendous health consequences when people don't have access to adequate amounts of nutrient-dense fresh produce. And we see in the city of Detroit and other places around the United States tremendous incidences of diseases that can be controlled by diet. We see tremendous incidences of diabetes. We see tremendous incidences of childhood and adult obesity. We see tremendous incidences of high blood pressure and heart disease. And not to say that there's a one-to-one correlation between what you eat and these diseases, but we know that eating more nutrient-dense fruits and vegetables, whole grains, and eating less things with high fats, saturated fats, is better for our health and will prolong our lives. But often in areas like Detroit, it's more difficult to get an apple than it is to get some junk, to get some Church's chicken or something like that, right? And so many people over the last 20 years have started using the word food desert to describe those areas where we have poor access to food. I want to challenge you to think a bit beyond that term, food desert, and to consider a term that my friend Karen Washington has been advancing, which she calls food apartheid. And I'll tell you why we think food apartheid is a better term to use to describe lack of access to food. When most people think of a desert, they think it is a naturally occurring ecosystem. It's just something that happens in nature, right? We have tundras, and we have plains, and we have swamps, and we have deserts. These are things that just happen naturally. But the thing about the disparities we see in the food system and who has access to and who doesn't have access is it's not just some natural system. It's intentional, and it's the result of years and years of policy. And so by calling it a food desert and giving the impression that it's some naturally occurring phenomena, we remove the intentionality behind the oppression that we see within the food system. And so we would invite you to consider using the term food apartheid to describe these inequalities that we see. We also see in this food system tremendous exploitation of workers, particularly in the meat industry or in the agriculture industry, that not only do we have migrants who are so-called illegals, and I'm sure this church, is beyond all that kind of nonsense. No one's illegal, right? That's right. That's right. That's right. Particularly on stolen land where they move the border, right? Right. But anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. But we see tremendous exploitation of workers, and particularly workers who are so-called undocumented are in a particularly vulnerable position to be exploited economically, to be abused verbally, to be abused physically and sexually. And all of these things occur with the people who work in the food system and provide our food. We see this food system because it's driven by profit, having tremendously negative environmental impacts. One of the major sources of carbon in the atmosphere is the carbon released from vehicles transporting food thousands of miles away. In the United States, food is transported an average of 1,500 miles from where it's produced to where it's consumed. And we're burning petroleum in order to do that. And of course, that is emitting carbon into the atmosphere, which is contributing to global warming. Also, the tremendous amount of packaging that is used in the food industry has tremendous negative impacts on the environment. The raising of pigs and cattle in what we call CAFOs, or confined animal feeding operations, has tremendously negative impacts on both human health, the health of the animals, and the environment. And in many cases, we have pits where the waste from pigs is dumped into pits of water, and that water leaches into the groundwater and again has tremendously negative impacts on the environment. Where the Mississippi River empties into the Gulf of Mexico, which I still call it that regardless of what. You know, some people have capitulated with that nonsense. But where the Mississippi River empties into the Gulf of Mexico is the largest dead zone in the United States. A dead zone is an area where aquatic life cannot survive because of the tremendous amount of chemicals in the water. And in particular, some of the runoff from agricultural production leaches oxygen from the water, and plants and animals aren't able to survive as a result of that. And so these are all some of the things that the current food system is doing that are negative. On the Detroit level, on the retail level, when we go to grocery stores, what we see functioning is an extractive economy. Particularly in black and brown communities, we see other ethnic groups who come into those communities because they have been weakened by years of policy. For example, let's look at Detroit. We all know about Black Bottom and the destruction of Black Bottom, right? Okay, that's not new news to anyone. So that was a tremendously vibrant business district that was not exclusively but largely black. And so that is destroyed, and then you have an environment where it makes it right for other ethnic groups who perhaps have more entrepreneurial experience, or perhaps who have more favor by the State Department and are able to come into the country and set up businesses. We see those ethnic groups setting up businesses in predominantly black communities. I want to be clear. In Detroit, it's primarily Chaldeans who are doing it. This is not an attack on Chaldeans. That's not what this is. Because if you go to LA, it's going to be another ethnic group that's doing it. If you go to Chicago, it's another ethnic group. So the problem is not the ethnic group that are opening stores in black and brown communities. The problem is capitalism that pits groups against each other, right? But nevertheless, we don't want to see an extractive economy, an extractive food economy in Detroit, which is a majority black city, and when we spend our money to buy food, that money is leaving our community rapidly. We usually see very little employment in the places that we're buying food of the people who live in the community who are purchasing that food. We call that an extractive economy, and what we're trying to do is build a circular economy that actually benefits the people who spend the money instead of taking that money out of the community. We also see in the current food system a concentration of wealth in corporate hands and a consolidation of both production and retail. Over the last several years, many of the grocery chains have been swallowed up by larger chains. This is how capitalism functions. The big fish swallows the little fish. And so we see the merging and the consolidation of the major retailers around the country, and we see the same thing in the production side of things. In fact, almost all the meat that you eat in this country is produced by 5 companies. And so this concentration of wealth in the hands of already wealthy, filthy capitalists is not doing us any good. So let's talk about what we've been doing in Detroit for the last 20 years with the Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network and others. And again, I just want to say clearly, I'm not leading that organization. I'm retired. We have two brilliant black women, Shakira Tyler and Gianna Cheers, who are the current co-executive directors. So it was mentioned that we led the development of the Detroit People's Food Co-op, but I want to talk about a few other things that we did, and then we'll go into details about the co-op, and then I'll wrap it up. So the Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network was founded in February of 2006. In fact, this month is our 20th anniversary, and throughout 2026, the organization will be celebrating 20 years of working for black food sovereignty. We changed our name from the original name of the organization, which was the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. We changed it from food security to food sovereignty in 2023 as our consciousness about our work grew. And I'll just explain briefly why we made that change. Food security means that people have enough calories to go about their day-to-day lives, that people are not hungry. And while that certainly is a worthy goal in a country as wealthy as America, it's still a relatively low bar. So as my sister Joanne Watson used to say, it's a sin and a shame before God that anybody should be hungry in this country, right? As much wealth as there is. So everybody to, have enough to eat. But again, that's a low bar. Food sovereignty is when the people who consume the food and produce the food are shaping and controlling the system that provides it. They're not just the end consumers, but they are shaping it in a way that benefits them, benefits the environment, and benefits humanity, as opposed to having filthy capitalism. You can tell I don't like capitalism, right? So every time I say capitalism, I have to say add filthy in front of it, right? Just to make the point. So food sovereignty is when the people themselves are designing these systems, shaping them, and controlling them so that it has the maximum benefit. And so in 2023, we changed the name of our organization to Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network, because that's really what we're striving for, sovereignty. So not only do we want sovereignty in the realm of food, but we think people should control all of the institutions in our community that shape our lives. One of the things we did early on in 2009 is Detroit Food Policy Council, which continues to exist. And while we don't think that we should stake our hopes on what government does one way or the other, we think that primarily the primary vehicle for removing oppression is the people themselves acting independently. We also think that government has the responsibility of being responsible to the people it's supposed to serve. And so while on the city of Detroit to solve the problem of food sovereignty, we think that by creating a food policy council that impacts policy, we can move us more in that direction. And so in 2009, we created the Detroit Food Policy Council that continues to exist and influence policy in the city of Detroit as regards to food. I'll say this, that food intersects with every other system within society. If you're talking about transportation, you have to think about its relationship to food. If you're thinking about education, you have to think about its relationship to food. And so we need holistic policy. I'm thankful that the new mayor, the current mayor, the first black woman to be elected mayor of Detroit, is beginning to think in a more holistic way and is having her department heads kind of meet together so that they're not operating in silos. So we will continue to give good sister grace and watch her and support her, but also stand ready to hold her accountable. We also think it's important that we have young people involved. You know, I mentioned in 56 and raised primarily in the 60s and 70s. And in 1969, after I first heard a record by Malcolm X and my consciousness was awakened, I was under the mistaken belief that in the next 2 or 3 years, the revolution was going down and we was going to be free, right? So clearly, you know, many of us were naive and didn't understand that not only is this a protracted struggle, but struggle. And so one of the things that we did in recognition of that in the Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network is started 2 youth programs, because we understand that we can't have all people with gray in their beards and hairs in their heads leading the movement, right? We need young people, right? Everybody in the house under 20, throw your hands up, by the way. They're all upset. Okay, good. We need to intentionally cultivate young people who are going to be leading this movement. Started two organizations, or two programs, the Food program, which is for young people in elementary school, and then for high school students, we have what's called Food and Flavor. And in both groups, we teach young people how to grow food. With the high school students, they also learn how to produce products and sell those products. One of the things that we're most well known is D-Town Farm. We have a 7-acre farm in Rouge Park. We have an agreement with the city of Detroit, a license agreement for a 20-year agreement now to use that space to grow food organically, and we've been doing that at that spot since 2000. What we're trying to do is, again, create a closed-loop economy where we can grow food not just at D-Town but at other local farms, and we can put that food in the retail establishment, the Detroit People's Food Co-op, and again create a closed-loop economy so that we're not having this wealth extracted from our community. Recently, the Detroit Black Farmer Land Fund, a coalition that has funded more than 100 black farmers since 2020, came under the auspices of the Detroit Black Community Food Network. And then also, the last thing is we built this building down the street with our development partner, Develop Detroit Incorporated, Sister Sonia Mays. We built the Detroit Food Commons, which is a 31,000 square foot, 2-story building. This is the Detroit People's Food Co-op. I'm not going to go into a lot about co-ops right now. I'll just say that, as you already know, I have a great disdain for capitalism, and co-ops are a step towards getting us to think about what a post-capitalist economy might look like. They are a step to get us to think about how we might cooperate for our common good. They're a step towards restoring democracy in our communities and thinking about how we collectively address the problems that we face. So co-ops are important for many different reasons. So we have the Detroit People's Food Co-op on the first floor of the building, which buys from more than 100 local vendors, again, as part of this idea to circulate money within the community. We have a hot bar section, which is very popular, and I think that's what catered the meal today. And then we have all of the kind of groceries that you might expect at any grocery store. We would invite you to support regularly the Detroit People's Food Co-op. You know, we opened in May of 2024, but one of the criticisms we often hear is, oh, the price not as high, not as low as Walmart. So as we're building these kind of alternative structures and institutions, we have to be aware that we don't have the wherewithal to compete economically with a Walmart or a Meijer, right? And so they can frankly sell things cheaper than we can for. And so we have to have a commitment to development that is beyond just the cost of goods, right? And thinking about what is the greater good that we're doing by supporting institutions that we control. On the second floor of the building, co-op is the main feature of the building. In fact, that's the only sign that's on the building right now because of some city regulations. But on the second floor, the Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network has its offices, operates the 3,000 square foot Mama Imani Humphrey Banquet Hall, which is the frequent location for political discussions and meetings, as we hoped it would be. We were trying to create a space where people could conspire and dream about freedom. Mama Imani Humphrey Hall is named after the iconic Detroit African Center educator who's now an ancestor, who was my teacher, Mama Imani Humphrey, who worked in Detroit public schools for many years at King High School, developing black history courses, and later developed Detroit's first African-centered school, Aisha Shule. Also on the second floor, we have the 4 Kuji Chagulia kitchens, 4 commercial kitchens. In fact, we have the largest commercial kitchen operation in the state of Michigan. We're trying to create an environment that can nurture the development of food entrepreneurs on a community level, again, so we can create a circular economy. So I'll end by saying there are several things that you can do that we would invite you to do to support a more food sovereign Detroit. The first would be to support the Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network by becoming a sustainer. And I'm not going to do a deep kind of ask at this point in church, but I'll say that you can go to our website, www.dbcfsn.org, dbcfsn.org. We're looking for people to become sustainers so that we can reduce our dependence on grants. You can support local farms and gardens, prioritizing Black and brown-led farms. There are, at this point, more than 100 small farms and gardens in the city of Detroit. Some are doing it for fun, some are giving the food away, some are sharing among communities, some are selling it. We would invite you to participate in a robust way in that movement. Also, we want you to shop at and consider becoming a member owner of the Detroit People's Food Co-op. You can go to the website, and that's simple to remember. It's just DetroitPeoplesFoodCoop.com. Please consider shopping there regularly and becoming a member owner. And then finally, we would encourage you to advocate for policies in whatever way that you can that create greater justice and equity, such as protecting SNAP and WIC. We want you, depending on where you might work or where you're affiliated, if you have some power to influence institutional purchasing, and we can get institutions to purchase from local farmers and local food providers, that again creates a more circular economy. And we would encourage you to advocate for more just and equitable land policies. So finally, in closing, I'll say, let's stand so firmly in our resolve to steward a new, more just and equitable society, and let us shine so brightly with love, care, and respect for each other that we call the divine guidance and protection forward that we need to survive and push through the greed, hate, violence, and authoritarianism which we are currently facing. Thank you.